All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're jumping into a story from the First World War that is, well, it's honestly one of the most unbelievable true stories I've ever heard. It's a tale about chemical weapons, courage that just defies belief, and a counterattack so terrifying it literally looked like the dead were rising from their graves. This is the story of the Attack of the Dead Men.
So picture this. It's August 6, 1915, 4 o'clock in the morning on the Eastern Front. A really strange greenish-yellow fog starts rolling over the Russian trenches. But this wasn't some morning mist. No, this was a terrifying new weapon. And for the men you see in this photo, it was meant to be a silent, agonizing death sentence.
But before we get to the absolute insanity of that day, we really need to understand why. Why was this one fortress so incredibly important? To get that, we've got to rewind the clock just a little bit.
See, Osowiec wasn't just any old fortress. It was what military folks would call a critical chokepoint. The Russian Empire built it to control the only way across the massive Bibriza river marshes, and it also sat on a super important railway line. If you wanted to move an army through this part of the world, you had to go through Osowiec. There was simply no way around it.
This picture here gives you a pretty good sense of the terrain. The whole fortress was surrounded by bogs and swampland, so trying to launch a direct assault? Almost impossible. For the guys defending it, it was a dream. For anyone attacking it, a complete and total nightmare.
And believe me, the German army learned this lesson the hard way. They didn't just try to take Osowiec once, they threw themselves against its walls over and over again. And in the process, they basically helped create this legend that the fortress was invincible.
You can see right here, Germany just kept coming back for more. They launched a huge attack in September 1914. It failed. They came back a few months later with an even heavier bombardment, and that failed too. Every time the fortress held. But that third attempt, in the summer of 1915, well, that one was going to be different. Horrifically different.
Just look at the numbers from that first assault. It really shows you how outgunned the Russians were. The Germans had more men and way bigger guns. I mean, on paper, this should have been a quick and easy victory for them. But it wasn't.
So what was the result of that first German assault? This number, 6,000. That's how many casualties the Germans may have suffered. The Russian defenders hadn't just held the line, they had inflicted absolutely devastating losses on a much bigger attacking force.
The second attack was pretty much the same story. Massive shelling, infantry charges, all of them beaten back. So after getting thrown back twice, the German high command was frustrated. They couldn't break through with normal weapons, so they decided that for their third try, they were going to unleash a new and truly horrific type of warfare.
And this is what brings us back to that terrifying morning. After two bloody failures, the Germans weren't just trying to defeat the defenders of Osowiec anymore. They were trying to completely annihilate them.
Under the command of none other than Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, the German forces waited. They just waited for the wind to be perfect. And at 4 a.m., it was. They opened the valves on 30 gas batteries and didn't unleash shells. They unleashed pure poison.
You know, this wasn't an accident. It was a cold, brutal calculation. They were fully aware the Russian defenders had zero protection against this kind of attack. Using chlorine gas wasn't just a tactic, it was a deliberate choice to cause the most agonizing casualties possible.
This green-yellow cloud of chlorine gas, it's heavier than air, so it just sank into every trench, every dugout. The 900 or so Russian defenders were completely swallowed by it. Their only defense? Wrapping wet rags around their faces. A gesture that was, well, it was completely useless against a chemical attack like this.
So for all intents and purposes, the battle should have been over. The Russian defenses went silent. But what happened next? What happened next is the reason this battle has its own name. This moment of absolute, certain death turned into one of the most shocking, unbelievable counterattacks you will ever hear about.
To get what happened next, you have to understand what chlorine gas does to a human body. It burns your lungs, from the inside out. The handful of Russian soldiers still alive were in unimaginable pain, coughing up blood and literal pieces of their own lungs, their skin covered in chemical burns. And yet, somehow, led by their dying Lieutenant Kotlinski, these few survivors fixed their bayonets and they charged. Can you even imagine the psychological shock? The 14 German battalions are advancing, thinking they're just walking into an empty fortress full of corpses. Instead, what comes charging out of that poison fog is a sight from a nightmare. Men covered in blood and blisters, literally coughing up their insides, and yet they're still running right at them. The Germans panicked. They broke formation and they fled, with some getting tangled up in their own barbed wire trying to get away.
The defenders of Osowiec had done the impossible. They had won. But the story has this tragic, ironic twist at the end.
So despite winning this incredible, unbelievable victory, the bigger picture on the Eastern Front had changed. Just 12 days later, because they were about to be surrounded, the Russian command ordered the garrison to blow up their own undefeated fortress and abandon it. They won the battle, but they were forced to retreat anyway.
It's wild to think that the fortress that saw so much violence and such impossible bravery is now a memorial, part of a national park. A quiet monument stands today where one of history's most ghastly and courageous charges happened.
And its story didn't end in 1915. Osowiec was used by the Polish army, it saw fighting again in World War II, and parts of it are still an active military base to this day. It just goes to show you how strategically important that one spot on the map has always been.
So that leaves us with this final question. The attack of the dead men was a tactical victory, born from just pure defiance against all odds. But it didn't change the outcome of that campaign. So it leaves us wondering, doesn't it? It makes you think about the nature of courage and what it truly means to win.